the mortgage companies are drying up or disappearing. Is that something that we should be stressed about?
You should be stressed about all of this. We have just gone through the most unprecedented 36 hours. To have the Bank of England feel that it has to come out and calm things 48 hours after we get a new budget, you don't tend to...
That's never happened before.
No, you don't tend to see that sort of thing. The Bank of England likes to be quiet, does not... The last thing the Bank of England wants to do is get involved in the Treasury. But with the mortgage deals, Eamon, it's not so much the pound that's the problem there. It's the volatility in the fixed income market, in the bond market. So if you have a mortgage, that's priced off of government bonds. Mm-hmm. And they're so volatile right now. They're moving all over the place. Those mortgage deals will come back. They might not come back at a rate that we've got so used to seeing very, very low interest rates, very, very low mortgage rates. These deals will come back. This is how these banks make money.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the promise made by Sir Keir Starmer at the party conference. He's saying, I will get 1.5 million more people on the property ladder. Have you looked at how he's going to do that?
It's promising property ownership has been the undoing of so many governments in this country. What I would prefer to see is a lot more house building. That has to happen. And it's interesting because Kwasi Kwarteng last week did make a broad brush attempt at some of the things that I think really will affect the economy, like reforming planning, like getting skills up to snuff, like looking at trade. These are things that will change the economy. But in terms of getting a target for home ownership, all that's going to do is encourage people to take on a lot of debt that they may not be able to afford.
So in many ways, what you're saying, the parity almost with the dollar is not the big headline story here. It's the gilt yields, and that has a knock-on then for people's personal finances.
Absolutely.
Which is why there's a lot of people worrying about, and indeed the Labour Party saying that the government is gambling with people's mortgages.
Oh, absolutely, with that. And not just mortgages, things like credit card debt. Lots of people have a lot of credit card debt. That is keyed off the government bond markets. People should be worried about these because these interest rates are going up, and the pound may recover, but I don't think we're going to see much of an improvement in the bond markets for a very long time, simply because the government has to borrow so much to keep its promises.
And if they're borrowing so much and interest rates are going up to something like 6%, explain what that...
anyone who gives you a forecast for interest rates right now that's real finger in the wind stuff. But the principle is, the more that the government has to borrow, the less safe it is that they will ultimately repay those borrowings. So the interest rate has to rise because you become much more risky. But let's put this in perspective. Right now, the UK has to pay more to borrow for 2 or 5 years than Greece. Interest rates are higher here than in Greece and then in Italy. Remember the whole Greek euro crisis? We're now paying more to borrow for 2 years than Greece is. That is how high interest rates have become. That's the lack of confidence in the UK economy.
I was saying a moment ago that sterling's not the big story, but actually we were doing worse in terms of sterling than the ruble yesterday, if we're doing the international picture.
The ruble actually had a pretty good run, which is rather scary.
In the middle of a war, and the sterling did worse than ruble yesterday.
Oh, by a lot. I mean, sterling is one of the worst performing currencies in the world against the dollar right now. Part of that's a little bit is the dollar. The dollar is very strong because people think interest rates will go higher in the U.S. than they will here in the U.K. But, I mean, the real spur for this sell-off was Kwasi Kwarteng saying, we're just going to borrow. We're just going to borrow. It will be fine. Don't worry. Don't worry. And then going on television over the weekend and saying, we're not done cutting taxes yet. That was the trigger for what happened yesterday. Sterling has steadied between 107 and 108. Let's see how long it stays there. A lot of the stability came from what I thought was a pretty weak statement from the Bank of England. But the Bank of England coming out and saying, we won't hesitate to raise interest rates. Of course, by saying we won't hesitate to raise interest rates and not raising interest rates looks like a little bit of a hesitation, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so who is running the show, the government or the Bank of England?
Excellent question, Eamon.
Thank you very much.
Question. No, seriously. Because they're pulling in very, very different directions. This extra borrowing, this cutting taxes could be inflationary. So you've got a splurge, a fiscal splurge on one side. You have rampant inflation on the other side, which the Bank of England is trying to get under control. So they're complete polar opposites. It'll be fun to see how long Kwasi Kwarteng and Andrew Bailey can be in the same room and smile at each other.
Is there a chance that this giant gamble, work out? And that this isn't just fairy tale economics?
I thought Eamon was going to ask that, actually, because you are such an optimist. Sure, it might work out for some. There's every chance that ultimately this could boast headline growth. So we could look at GDP growth, and that may improve. So on the surface,
that's
it'll look
the plan, right?
That's the
plan.
plan.
Was never to tank the pound in the process.
Probably never to tank the pound. But I think any growth that we have, because some of these tax cuts are concentrated at the people who need them the least, if these people go out and spend extra money, that's extra consumption. Consumption is 2/3 of the economy. Yes, the economy could show growth, but it probably will have the effect of increasing inequality because all of that extra spending will be at the top level of income.